Well, India nearly made history today. The Supreme Court of India delivered its judgment on the same sex marriage case. Four judgments were read out by a bench of five judges over close to 2 hours. Mixed reactions coming in on whether the court was conservative in its assessment, in its judgment, or has the conversation on equal rights moved forward? I have with me to take this discussion forward one of the petitioners in the same sex marriage case, Mr. Udit Sood, Ms. Tahira Karanjawala, partner Karanjawala and Company. She was representing the petitioners, and my colleague Thyagarajan, who's been tracking this case for a very long time. Let me begin with you, Thyagarajan, first. Just help us make sense of this judgment. A lot of confusion. We heard the CGI talk about adoption rights. We heard others disagree with him. So where are we right now in this whole discourse on equal rights in the same-sex marriage case?
So as far as I can say, I think all the five judges have agreed that legal sanction to same-sex marriage is in the domain of Parliament. They've also agreed that the same-sex couples and transgenders need to be given protection from the state, and the state should protect them from all kinds of discrimination. Specifically, Justice Ravindra Bhatt and the CJI in their judgments have said they should not be forced to undergo any medical procedure without their consent, forced to undergo any medical procedure rather. So these are some highlights basically. But on the issue of adoption, there are two views. Because not two views, basically, Justice CJI said unmarried couples have the right to adopt, while three judges, Justice Ravindra Bhatt, Justice Hima Kohli, and Justice Narasimha, have said the CARA regulation per se need not be struck down. They've upheld the regulation, which means for now the unmarried couples cannot adopt per se. So these are some highlights. We'll know more once the copy of the judgment comes out.
Absolutely. Thanks, Thyagarajan, for that. Let me come across to you, Udit. You've been fighting this case. You're one of the first petitioners of this case. What do you feel? Do you feel that, the Supreme Court of India has lived up to the expectation, or do you feel disappointed today?
I feel pretty devastated, to be honest. These comments about protecting and enacting laws to prevent discrimination against queer people, it's the court's job. Under our constitution, it is the job of the Supreme Court of India and our judiciary to protect discrimination. Our constitution requires that. And so to turn around and say, well, no, actually state, hey, why don't you think about it? And at some unspecified time in the future, enact some laws to protect queer people, it's really a disappointing outcome. I think the greatest tragedy here is that this ruling sends a clear message to queer kids growing up in India today. It tells them, look, you have a right to marry. You can marry. All you need to do in order to exercise that right is lie to yourself, lie to your partner, lie to your partner's family, lie to your family, lie to your community, and then you can get married. But if you choose to be open about who you are, then sorry, we need to wait for some time while the government gets its act together. And so I think it's a devastating ruling, and I'm still trying to process it, to be honest with you.
Honestly, I'm so sorry to hear that, Udit. I did not realize that, when we were hearing the judgment and I heard the CGI, I thought he was so brave in making the statements that he did. But then we heard the other judges comment on that. And I think that's when it became clear that it's a very divided house. Let me come across to you, Tahira. Were you expecting this judgment, or were you expecting it to be taking the whole issue of rights forward?
To be honest, I was a little more optimistic than I perhaps ought to have been. And having said that, I thought I was being quite cautious. I had felt that they would declare a fundamental right to marry, but then would leave it to the legislature to operationalize that right. So what effectively the court has done is that all five judges are unanimous in recognizing that there is no fundamental right to marry under our constitution. They are, however, Udit is very disappointed, and of course his feelings are absolutely justified. But just to give a perspective on what the court has also said, the court has said that has recognized the right of an intimate association of homosexual couples, the right to cohabit, the right to love freely, and has also given sort of guidance to the state and the police, etc., to try and protect homosexual couples as they cohabit together. Having said that, all the five judges have stopped short of actually recognizing the right of marriage. Two of the five judges, the Honorable Chief Justice as well as Honorable Justice Kaul, have recognized that the inherent in the Constitution is the right to a civil union. However, the other three judges, Honorable Justice Bhatt, Honorable Justices Kohli and Narasimha, have disagreed with this and have said that this is completely within the realm of the legislature. This is a fully these are matters of policy, and the court cannot interfere in these rights, in the grant of these rights, which is left to the legislature. So, as far as this is concerned, it is 3-2 against even the concept of a civil union. All the five judges have, of course, referred to the suggestion that was made by the learned Solicitor General, saying that there would be a committee to try and operationalize certain day-to-day rights which may be granted to homosexual couples, even if the theoretical right of marriage cannot be granted. So I suppose this is something that the community can look to, but of course it's not something. It's a little bit of a disappointing day overall for us.
I just want to understand where are we, when it comes to rights of wages, when it comes to employment, adoption, surrogacy. We heard bits of it today, and this is something that the petitioners have been arguing for. Does the judgment today take any of that fight forward, or are we still where we were last year? Can I request Udit and Tahira to come in on this, please?
So I'll say really quickly, I think some wins from today are the clarification that trans people, trans men and women can get married under existing laws, including religious laws. And so that clarification, I think, is a really meaningful one. So we need to accept that win. On abortion, it's not clear to me that the needle has been moved meaningfully. I'll defer to Tahira. I'll need to read the actual judgments to really see all of these other things that Tahira pointed out. Guidance from a committee and so on. All of that is, in my mind, too hazy and too nebulous to really get excited about.
Okay, Tahira, would you like to come in here?
So I think that to a large extent, the rights of couples to cohabit and to sort of the rights of intimate association had already been recognized in Navtej Johar, and they have been re-emphasized by all the five judges in this judgment. What the judges have gone slightly forward in granting certain directions that the state should actively take steps to protect such couples, and there's been quite a lot of directions given on that aspect. However, in terms of granting rights of statute, I think the judgment has fallen short of that, because they have left it to the legislature. They have been careful to not transgress into the legislative domain. So at the end of the day, what you have is perhaps overall guidance to the state and the legislature to sort of enact laws which are not discriminatory. In fact, I think Justice Kaul went ahead and said that there should actively be laws enacted, which are not discriminatory, and an anti-discrimination law. So to that extent, I think there are sort of strands of the judgment, and as Udit said, we'll have to sort of read it to fully understand, the gamut of rights that has been given or not given. But I think what is clear is that the Honorable Judiciary has said that, as far as the right of marriage is concerned, it is a statutory right. It is a legal construct which the Parliament has to recognize. It is not something that is inherent in the Constitution. And therefore, the degrees and the rights that will be recognized within that institution is something which the Parliament will have to enact, having recognized that marriage is not a stagnant concept. So as society changes and Parliament gets the necessary support to enact these laws, they will take the necessary steps. However, I do want to come back to something Udit was saying originally, which is that the reason why we had approached the courts was that it is our belief that the right of marriage is actually a fundamental right. So there I would respectfully disagree with the judgment that has been passed today, because it brings with it a number of other rights, which today now you're depriving this community of. I could fully appreciate that perhaps it is difficult, it would have become unworkable. That was a concern that was, which, sort of we were seeing even the honorable judges expressing even during the hearings. But I think that the point was that there are certain rights, and we think that marriage is one of them, which are above, which are elevated to the status of fundamental rights, which are above a legislative, legislative majority, which is above a popular majority, because often such communities are too small in number to ever have the support of the Parliament. And I think that's the hope with which we had come to the Supreme Court. But of course, now various steps will have to be taken, perhaps to petition Parliament and sort of bring about social change in other ways, so as to one day, sort of get these rights for the community, whether it is by the legislature or through a committee or otherwise.
Sure. Thyagarajan, you've been tracking this case very closely. What were the arguments against, legalizing same-sex marriage that have been placed, in the court over the last several months? If you could just summarize them for us very quickly.
So essentially, Solicitor General Tushar Mehta led the charge in the government side. He said that the government would not like to comment on the merits of the case, but considering how vast the subject is, considering how much of a capacity that the Parliament has, it would be important, for all the states to be involved in this process, before any judgment or declaration from the Supreme Court comes. So essentially the union government said that this is in the domain of the Parliament to pass a law like this. And specifically, Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul also noted that Solicitor General's argument was that when you meddle with the Special Marriage Act, when you reinterpret the act, it will have cascading effect in other legislations as well, many other legislations. The Solicitor General cited hundreds of, he said that it would affect hundreds of legislations if there is a reinterpretation of the Special Marriage Act per se. So this I think weighed with the Constitution bench. Even during the course of the hearings, I think Chief Justice was somehow convinced that it was in the domain of the Parliament indeed.
Sure. Let me come across to you, Udit. Today the court also said that there will be a high-level government committee that the centre is forming to analyze legal sanction for same-sex marriage. What are your expectations from this committee?
Well, I hope, and I think that the court also is expecting that this committee approaches the subject in good faith. And so that would include really understanding what rights we are today being deprived as a result of not being able to marry, and then take meaningful steps to facilitate that nationwide, including places that are not Delhi or Bombay, where you don't have, more educated, open-minded people, including places where, queer kids really do struggle coming out to their parents, who don't in school have any avenues to discuss these subjects. That is the majority of our country. And so I'm hoping that the committee looks into all of these in a holistic way and then actually takes steps to do something about it. I will note that in Navtej in 2018, that was not just a hollow judgment that said, part of 377 is struck down. That was a very broad ruling that declared things like, one, queer citizens are entitled to the same constitutional, fundamental and human rights as other individuals. Number two, there were directions to the government to publicize the ruling and to initiate programs to alleviate discrimination, and a whole host of other similar directions and guidelines that we're seeing enacted today, or that we're seeing being ordered today by the court. And so for these to be ordered in 2018 and for the needle not to have been moved, no steps were taken to publicize that decision. No measures were taken to alleviate stigma. And so I just don't see how, I'm just not optimistic today that the committee will in fact do what it could have done in 2018.
Tahira, let me bring you in here. We just heard Udit, and he's saying that the needle hasn't really moved. What would you say? From the time when the homosexuality was decriminalized to today, when we heard the judges, the bench talking about how queer and transgender persons should not be forced to undergo any medical procedures. There was a lot of emphasis on ending discrimination. Just awarding grace and dignity to the community through all the judgments that were read out today. Do you think that will make a difference on ground, or do you think that all of this is just going to be part of the judgment and implementation or changing attitudes? It really doesn't move the needle on that.
No, I think it does. I mean, I do think it does move the needle. And I think what moves the needle even more, actually, and for me, this has been the real win, is that because of these hearings and because of the fact that they were live streamed, this conversation has gone into the public domain. So yes, there is a huge change socially, conversationally, from the Navtej Johar judgment to today. I mean, I think Udit and I can safely say that 7 years ago, we were not even having this conversation of whether this was possible or not. And I think today, given the kind of debate that the public has been exposed to because of the live streaming of these hearings, whether or not they agree or disagree, I feel that different generations have been exposed to this debate. And I feel like that's been the real win for me, because, people who I never thought would come out and even talk about this topic have been talking about it. And it's that which slowly, where social prejudice slowly starts to subside. When people talk about it, whether you disagree or you don't, whether you agree or disagree with the concept, at least it's in your mind, it's in your mind, it's something that you're debating. And slowly, that's, I think, how social change comes about. So for me, that's the real win. So that's how I think this hearing has moved the needle, in my view, more than even the judgment, perhaps.
Well, I would really hope so.
I'll just jump in to agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's spot on, and I think a lot of the credit to that goes, for that goes to the media, goes to people who've been covering the hearings, and so it's a missed opportunity for the court to not have led the discussion in a more meaningful and legally binding way. But I do think there has been change, despite the government's inaction. I'll stop there.
Right. We heard the CGI make some very definitive statements. He said that queer parents does not mean bad parents. I thought that was a very strong statement to make. He did speak about, I think I think he made some very progressive statements. Of course, he was not backed by his bench, but if we were to just look at individually what the bench spoke of. Tahira, I want you to come in on this. Did you get a sense that there was some conservative judges and some more on the progressive side, and which is why we saw like a divided house on this one?
So I don't, to be absolutely honest with you, I don't think that it was about the sort of conservatism when it came to personal views. I think that the three judges whose judgment now forms the majority, have taken a conservative view when it comes to stepping into the legislative domain. To that extent, I think that yes, they have been very cautious not to tinker with the domain which they have they have considered to be part of that of the legislature. I think the worry was really that if you start reading in rights into the Special Marriage Act, there are certain, which I think Justice Bhatt, sort of also alluded to in his judgment, that there are certain protective rights for women. Often our laws have been framed in a way to protect women. So how will those provisions apply to homosexual couples? I think that was the real worry. Will they dilute or water down the protections that have been afforded to women? And I think it was this sort of gamut of concerns that made three of the honorable judges sort of restrain themselves from going into what they felt was the legislative domain. Two of the honorable five judges have at least recognized that even if they have not recognized that there is a fundamental right of marriage, they have recognized that there is a fundamental right of a union. And I think, that's also a big step which shouldn't be sort of minimized, even though today that's not the majority judgment, unfortunately. But I think that's not a small thing, and sort of that's one of the liberal sort of voices which has come through.
And the fact that the CJI said that homosexuality is not an elite concept, I think that that's an important finding. And I think both justices Kaul as well as Justice Chandrachud have held that it is not an urban elite concept, and have emphasized that this is a pan-India phenomenon which needs to be recognized. Even the other three honorable judges have also said that homosexual couples deserve the full protection of the law when it comes to enjoying the relationship, but they've just not gone that extra step to recognize it as a civil union. Mm-hmm. I think, so now, Udit, what are your next steps? What are you planning to do now? And Tahira, this same question is for you as well. What do we expect from the petitioners?
Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead,
Tahira. Okay. I'll just say that I as a gay man, and we as a queer community are used to setbacks. If we are anything, we are resilient and we know how to persevere. We know how to take a beat to assess what has happened and then to strategize and move forward. And so that is exactly what we're going to do. We're still waiting for PDFs of the judgment to become available. Once they do become available, we'll study them. We will commiserate together today and this week, and we will talk about what comes next. Even if this ruling had gone the complete other direction and the Supreme Court of India had said, yes, there is a fundamental right to marry, and yes, we're going to recognize it under the Special Marriage Act, I think even then the fight would not have ended. I think we would still, as a community, have a lot of work to do to make lives better on a day-to-day basis for queer Indians living in India who aren't able to, like me, leave and just improve their circumstances because they're privileged to do that. And so work would have had to continue even in that situation. And now today just means we still have a longer way to go.
Right. So Tahira, let's just breaking this down, okay? Now, after this judgment, does it become easier for a queer couple to rent? Does it become easier for them to, just adopt a child, for instance, to enjoy regular pleasures of companionship? Does it alter their perception in the society in any way?
I think to the extent, as I said, to the extent that this has become part of your normal debate, yes, I think it will. I feel that the fact that this hearing itself has happened has opened the eyes of many people of, frankly, the generation about, sort of senior to us. I think That's the generation that struggles more with accepting homosexuality as a concept than our generation or the generations that are coming after us. So I think to that extent, yes, to some extent, it will make it easier for, say, couples to rent. It in certain cross sections of society. We will also have to just see how, with how much vigor this committee will operationalize the rights that have been promised during the hearings. And maybe it will become about, going after each right individually. We were hoping that the entire bouquet of rights would be recognized if the right of marriage was recognized. But now perhaps one by one, these rights will have to be litigated, sort of the right of succession, etc. So we will have to see, to what extent the committee operationalizes this and to what extent it can be taken to the courts thereafter. But as Udit said, I think that this community, it's a brave, beautiful, vibrant community. They are a resilient lot. And I think they will find a way to persevere on and bring about the slow social change that is ultimately the goal of the movement.
Right, I have to say, and I agree that the conversation has really shifted in the last decade or so, even, right? We are talking about things that were never discussed openly, and now it's being discussed on national television. I have a question on, and Tahira, this is for you, on whether the court should have kept the case pending so that the directions are followed. Do you think that's something that the court could have done?
I don't think, given that they held that there is no fundamental right, I don't think much would have been achieved by keeping keeping it pending now. It is only if they had declared a right in theory and then said that we cannot operationalize that right, which is what I was optimistically hoping for, actually, as a realistic outcome. In that situation, perhaps they could have given some time to the legislature to bring about the necessary amendments in the law. In that situation, it may have been, sort of in everybody's interest to keep the matter pending, so that the legislature could come back in a sort of more time-bound way. But since they have not recognized that right, I don't think much would be achieved by keeping the matter pending. Now, as and when, as I said, these rights come to individual couples, they will be litigated separately, I suppose.
All right, let me come across to Thyagarajan for the last word on this. Thyagarajan, what's been the overall verdict? We've spoken to Udit, we've spoken to Tahira, but you've been speaking to lawyers, you've been spoken to other petitioners as well. Overarchingly, what's the verdict?
Well, so for now, there is a lot to say, but like every other lawyer who litigated in this case would say, let's wait for the judgment to come. But ultimately, I think 5 of the 5 judges have held that this is in the domain of the legislature, considering the amount of work that needs to be put in before even recognizing such a right. So that's the word.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. Thank you, Udit, and thank you, Tahira, and thank you, Thyagarajan. We do believe that the needle has moved forward, and I think it's because of the persistent effort of all of you out there. And I, for one, I'm very optimistic that this conversation will keep opening more doors of taking the conversation, pushing the envelope forward on equal rights. Thank you so much for joining us, and big thanks to all our viewers. Do send us your comments, thoughts, and feedback. Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you.